first of all, Liliana.
Thank you very much just for inviting and happy to be here. In a completely different kind of environment that I'm usually in. I'm a brand strategist and I'm really focused on innovations and driving innovation products, marketing, marketing strategies, also very much into people and how they can really connect and continue driving adapting to the changes which they come in different contexts and situations, not just through the M&As, but I think in most of the cases they are impacted by when a company is going through an M&A process. But also generally, I think the world we live in impacted companies and the need to adapt to what's going on in the environment. So then basically people and brands need to adapt and change exactly the way they are to be able to navigate. So I'm representing Unilever, so I've been with them for 16 years, quite a long time, and quite different, cover different areas in terms of marketing, so that's my specialty. And I'm basically happy to share with you some kind of knowledge from inside of a company who did quite a lot of acquisition and quite a lot of them lately in different areas, like different type of brands integrated in different ways within the company. And also a big diversion last year, so which was our spread business.
So Oliver from Aperio Intelligence.
Thank you, Charles. So I'm Oliver Brind, and I work with Aperio Intelligence, an independent business intelligence and financial crime consultancy. We're based just up the road, just north of the Barbican. And our role really is to assist clients with the challenges of due diligence, covering some of the sort of aspects associated with sort of people, places, and circumstances.
Very good, thank you very much. And Oliver was one of the originators of the forum, so he gave us he was one of the original members who said, let's do this forum, and he pushed us hard to do it, so I'm very grateful. Also a sponsor.
Anne-Marie. So I'm Anne-Marie Martin, and actually there is a big connection between all of us, which is worth mentioning. Let me tell you who I am first of all. So I'm currently working with the British Chambers of Commerce. I am very recently the former CEO of an organisation called COBCO, which is an umbrella organisation of British chambers across Europe. And before that, I was the CEO of a British bilateral chamber, the British Romanian Chamber of Commerce. And that is actually the link on the panel. Two of us are Romanian. One more obvious than the other, probably, just from the accent. I met Oliver through my connections with Romania many years ago when I was the CEO of the British Romanian Chamber of Commerce. And Charles lived in Romania, which I didn't know actually until today. So, yes.
And it's funny, the last I didn't plan it that way, and the last one was all PwC.
So Romania is the common denominator, I'm very, very proud to say. So my role with the British Chambers of Commerce, basically the reason they asked me to come on board was to develop and grow their global network of British Chambers of Commerce, literally located across the world. So we currently have something like 30 members outside of the UK. We have 53 regional UK chambers, which literally covers the whole of the regions of the UK. They represent in turn about 75,000 companies. The 30 chambers outside of the UK are predominantly outside of Europe. There are about 3 or 4 within Europe at the moment. We are, my previous organisation, the members of COBCO will be coming in as a block as well into the BCC network very shortly, so we'll be doubling in size internationally, and then we'll be growing that. As you can imagine, a great deal of that strategy revolves around the B word, which was mentioned earlier. But actually, it's not just about the B word. I think what the B word has been quite good at doing is galvanizing some of this kind of collectivity around working together. And I'm all about international partnerships, actually all about partnerships full stop. So it's how to come together to counter some of the impact of the geopolitics, because actually Brexit's not the only show in town globally, I mean, and also to harness and to grasp some of the opportunities and to really start to get the whole international trade agenda and the UK's strategy around growing the economy through international trade to become far more sort of private sector led. So essentially, if we grow to the size that we want to at the British Chambers of Commerce, we could become probably one of the largest sort of private sector led organisations with a global footprint that could be delivering services and support, practical support, because that's what Chambers of Commerce are supposed to do, for companies looking to enter new markets or grow their businesses in new markets. So in terms of an M&A perspective, I'm probably the imposter on the panel. It's not something that sits, not necessarily, it doesn't sit uncomfortably with me, but it doesn't sit comfortably because it's not something, it's not a world I live in. But we do represent a lot of companies that do participate and do a lot of it.
Very good. So just, do you have any questions, first of all? So, as I said, we're going to do it slightly differently. Do you have any questions for Anne-Marie, Oliver, or Liliana? Yes.
Hi, Maureen.
Can you say, sorry, just say your name first.
Will McFarlane from Total Productivity Solutions. I focus on corporate troubleshooting and operational effectiveness. And I just wanted to know where the British Chamber's viewpoint is in respect of product portfolio, because the UK is a net importer, and post Brexit, potentially there's opportunity for other countries to supply into the UK. But where does the Chamber see the match between how we operate here and the standards that they might operate to in those other countries? Is there any work on harmonising the standards?
Well, that's government-led, to be fair. So from a BCC point of view, we're pushing very hard that there is common standard. Absolutely, that continues. And I think, to be fair to the UK government, there is a real desire to do that. But of course, it's not only up to the UK government. That's the point.
Yes, and I think your point was that it's private sector led largely.
Yes, and I think increasingly the private sector has gained its voice and is able to vocalise its requirements under that. So there is a discussion around, do we become, that you hear it in the political sphere as well, a rule taker or a rule giver, and actually on a personal level, not a BCC line, but I would imagine we will have to become a rule taker. So, that's the way it goes. But don't quote me as a BCC. No press in the room.
There's no press here, and we've got control. So Oliver is coming back in reverse order now. So Oliver, in terms of Apereo and looking at, obviously we know people is very critical, but have companies actually hired you and say, right, we want to take you on, and if we don't, we might lose money, we might pull out of a deal or something like that, or?
Well, we don't always know while we're being engaged.
Right.
So there's not a direct correlation between someone taking us on and talking us through the reasons they're taking us on. We're often engaged by a financial institution that will probably be the intermediary in the context of the transaction. So we don't necessarily know what the end result of our findings is. But we would obviously hope that if it is an M&A transaction, by giving our clients, a full picture of the counterparties or of the target, that they will have a better, more holistic view of the target. They will be better aware of its strengths and weaknesses, and crucially, whether there are any reputational issues which might give them cause for concern and withdraw altogether. And clearly, reputational issues are much more intangible, and you can't sort of put a financial value to them.
Yeah.
But even if you're a well-established business and suddenly you do take a big hit to your reputation, it can take years to recover from that.
Yeah. So Liliana, just in terms of you're a bit like myself on the agency side, more you're a brand marketer. But in terms of the Unilever approach, what are the sort of 2 or 3 key points which are critical for acquisition success? So.
I think Sorry. Oh, it's very important to ensure first that through the acquisition and to the target of your acquisition, you cover a critical segment in the market, which otherwise you may not cover inside, by organic growing. And also it's very important to ensure that particular acquisition will really fit with the company in itself. And here it's a bit about, the culture, it's about the portfolio, it's about the product, it's about the brand. And then basically this will have a negative impact on your current portfolio. And yes, it happened also in our case, to have some acquisitions which end up not so successfully through the integration and didn't really succeed to build.
Was that because of culture not linking with?
I think there were two reasons, and a big learning for a big company like Unilever, and maybe that's the case of other companies too. When you try to make an acquisition and try to get the leadership position in some markets, but without really doing properly all the details into diligence, and really realize that you may get in a monopole position in a certain market, so basically you are not allowed to continue. You need to sell one of the brands for which you did acquisition. So basically that would be one area. So then it's about, how you really can review exactly what was the intention of buying and making that specific acquisition and how you really integrate. And I think the other part is very much about how to bring the culture and the people and really bring the brand as part of your own portfolio. If there is a completely different way of managing that specific brand, and you bring it in the Unilever culture, which is a big corporate world with a certain structure, then you may destroy them. So if it's a very niche brand, for example. Yeah.
So like for when Unilever bought Ben & Jerry's how many years ago, that you let Ben & Jerry's run it their Ben & Jerry's way.
I think that's a good example. So probably there are two which are going a bit, kind of opposite. One, it is the Sara Lee integration. Sara Lee.
Sara Lee, yeah.
Exactly, that's a company we acquired.
Well, they do hosiery and they make cakes and.
No, it's about in personal care.
Personal care.
Deodorants and shower gels and all these kind of things. And basically, it was one clear brand we wanted. Was the key focus, and it was Sunnies, which unfortunately we had then to sell it to one of our competitors.
So that was the main focus.
Main focus of buying, and then
to acquire Sunnies.
Exactly, as a brand because of complementing our portfolio, but unfortunately we couldn't keep it. But nevertheless, because that are brands very small and very tactical and very specific, focusing on a certain market, in the moment when taking them and trying to integrate and bring them and transforming to a global brand, then you lost their authenticity and what exactly they are intent for and the way how they have been developed. So then basically you lost some brands in this way. While the Ben & Jerry, for example, it's a completely different one, going in the other spectrum where you bought because you want to be relevant in a certain segment, you want to really acquire a company which will help you build your sustainability focus and sustainability agenda, but you don't interfere that one because you know that bring it and trying to transform into a big corporate company will really destroy the key element, what the brand stands for, or the company stands for. So, and that was a big learning, and that's the way how we do some of the acquisitions. So if you look probably in the last years where we bought a lot of companies within the prestige, because that was a very important area for personal care.
What kind of companies, for example?
Like Dermalogica or Murat. Let me think. There were a few other some brands in Asia. So basically, you'll just continue building that brand and let them work independently as they were, just because they give you give you the prestige and covering the segments of the market where you are not so strong. But also give you some access to some technology or some different other elements you can then take and bring them to the other brands you have in the company. So coming to your point, I think few key learnings or key areas. It's about the due diligence, also in terms of brands and the fit of the brands with the company itself, the fit of the portfolio, and the extension which will allow you to grow and enter in that segment which are growing and kind of drive further growth in the market. The other key element is ensure you continue and strengthen that respective brands and let them be and help them develop. Putting the resources which a big company like Unilever can have behind that brand and help them become even bigger. Because that can build your reputation in a certain area or certain sector where you may not be yet very strong present. And then it's about having clearly defined what the values of the company and how you align, create alignment between the new acquired company and the values of the.
So is that more on a corporate CSR level, the corporate branding, the alignment in terms of ethics and values as much as?
I think it's going down at all levels. It's not just because in the moment when I'm talking about people that are joining a new company. It's really important to see how they, you can embed them into the overall culture without really completely changing or alienate, what they used to have. So that's why it's coming the first step where it's about, the due diligence in terms of checking exactly where does the company culture fit with the one with the values you have.
And Oliver, do you when you do you look at sort of culture fit when you look at individuals? And do you have metrics? Are you regularly briefed on corporate social responsibility or personal social responsibility? In our organisation, I'm always talking about you've got to have personal social responsibility before you can meet the standards of corporate social responsibilities. Do you get asked to look at that as well, or more specifically?
Not specifically, but obviously, hopefully, it comes out sort of indirectly from our findings that, as you say, if the behaviour of the people who are leading a company. Their behaviour shows poor personal responsibility. I mean, that hopefully comes out loud and clear out of the report. And as you rightly say, if the characters of the principles is wrong, then it's highly unlikely that the company will have a sort of strong ethical values or a strong corporate culture.
And how far do you look down? How many levels? You obviously look at CEO and director level. Would you sometimes look down at manager level? Or
yeah, it very much depends.
Is it a multiple search from everybody in the company, or is it just certain individuals?
Senior, I mean, what you're trying to identify is who are the people responsible for day-to-day decision making. And clearly, you need to look beyond the chief executive and the finance director, and to see who else is involved. But of course, an enormous amount depends on the nature of the company, how many countries it's working in, the sort of industry it's involved with. And the resources company then clearly sort of manages an individual, down to quite a low level, then quite important because you're looking at the quality of the management of individual assets as well.
Good. Do you have? Now, I've worked quite a bit with British Chambers of Commerce. I've been done a presentation for Business West in Slovakia, but I've also worked with our teams on the ground. And some people, I think you're quite strong on this as well, putting with right partners.
Yeah.
It's about, we're talking about partnership development. It's the same as finding the right distributor or the right reseller. It's all about people. So
absolutely. And I think I think the British Chamber brand generally has the sort of brand association of trust and quality and good standards associated with it. So actually we hear members, when you ask a company, well, why do you join such and such chamber, or why would you join a chamber of commerce, it's not always just about the practical support that they may gain from that, or the knowledge or education as being for being part, or the connections. It's actually the fact that it's not just access to connections, it's a trusted environment.
Yeah.
Because most chambers, CEOs, particularly at chambers overseas, which are relatively small animals compared to the UK chamber network, for example. I think the average membership of a British overseas chamber is about 200 members. So most CEOs of that chamber will know, or the boards, who are made up of members anyway, will know their members very, very well. So actually when they recommend somebody, they pretty much hand on heart can recommend them because they know them well. And they know their history, and they can say that this is a trusted partner that you can work with. So I think the British Chamber movement has a reputation for creating those trusted connections between business to business.
Do you have any questions? So I got a question as well, because I know that DTI and there are a couple of ex-civil servants in the room. I won't say who they are, but, so I shouldn't call you civil servants. But ex-DTI people. So you work quite closely with. There's a bit of rivalry. They perhaps do the bigger deal, but you do actually work hand in hand with them.
Yeah, it's changed dramatically over the years. So historically, relationships between the local post and the British Chamber was relatively patchy, but over the years, frameworks have been created where they could come together and work more cohesively and more coherently together, and more constructively. And actually, in some markets, they even business plan together. Mm-hmm. And actually, at the HQ end, there's a real drive for working much more closely with private sector partners like the Chambers of Commerce. So we're seeing a very different approach to chambers and working with chambers, and actually looking at the strengths and weaknesses of all sides, and actually bringing together a whole apple, so to speak, between us.
So I'm asking all the questions here, but I'm waiting for hands to go up. We're all a bit tired, maybe. Not so much. In a sense, I always personally, it's very easy for me, perhaps because I lived a lot overseas, and yourselves. We've all lived overseas, so there's not this barrier, but there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of fear, isn't there, in British companies to go overseas.
Yes.
And how there's a constant challenge for British Chambers of Commerce and DTI, from what I understand, to get through that.
Yeah. But
so how are we going to do that?
Yeah, well, yes. So there's this huge revival, isn't there? Because we're talking about future relationships, trading relationships, post-Brexit world, and how suddenly we're going to conquer the world. And actually, in terms of export promotion, in particular, and inward investment. But actually, the reality is those markets were available to those companies in the first place. And I think there's another big reality check, is that the UK has a huge domestic market. And actually, for a lot of companies, they're doing very well in the domestic sphere. So in a way, taking that step into the unknown, it can be quite difficult. And culturally, generally, from my experience in Romania, for example, and my experience in Romania goes back to the time before Romania was not in the European Union. And actually, in industry, it goes back even further, when it was it's always been quite volatile, that part of the world, but when in the times of the sort of, for example, when I was in industry, I worked in the Yugoslav market before the Yugoslav war. So I'm very kind of in tune with geopolitical impact and what that can do to businesses as well. So I think companies, generally speaking, again, from what I saw in Romania, British companies were never the first investor in that market. And I think Oliver's going to agree with me on this. They were very risk averse.
And the Germans, almost since the Second World War, they've been very, very
active. Italy's actually number one. Italy, France, Germany, Austria, they're up there in the top 4 or 5, whereas Britain is probably 7 to 10. And I think that's a lot to do with the cultural differences. You mentioned cultural differences and before, and I think that's a big part of it.
But in India, India's an it's part of the Commonwealth, and we're number 18 investor.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Because it's a complicated market. So actually, what I suppose, sorry to the civil servants in the room, but I suppose the mistake that was made was to push companies, first-time exporters, to explore China, India, quite complex markets, not insurmountable, but complex. Yeah. And if you're already a little bit culturally risk-averse, to actually start your journey with Brazil, China, India, you're going to get your fingers burnt at some point, and you're not going to try it again. So actually, Europe was the obvious place.
Yeah.
Just so.
Well, here we go. Yeah, no, well, so there has to be. So, from your knowledge in what's happening in how many days is it? 15, 20. So, and by the way, we're 18 different nationalities here. I counted. So we're not all British. We don't. So you can say what you think. Okay, if you don't mind. And this whole idea of this forum is very international. So, what's going to happen? You know, are we?
Do you know the BCC's asked this all the time? All we can say is that whatever happens, there's got to be some certainty. We need to know what's going to happen.
So, but when you're talking to companies, are you saying, right, well, we've got to work down much harder now. We have to have more productivity. We have to have more energy with exporting. We have to be work harder on with our partners, our distributors, to make sure we have to work, localize our, make sure we have products which really fit the market.
Yes,
perfectly.
all of the above, but that's been said long before the Brexit or the referendum discussions happened. I mean, talking of sluggish productivity is actually not a new phenomenon. It's been around for some time, and actually we run. I don't know whether any of you have come across it, but look it up on our website. We run the largest independent quarterly economic survey in the country. And it actually has something like 6,000 respondents every quarter, so it's definitely worth looking at. And a lot of the data that's accumulated at the BCC in terms of some of the reporting is based on that data, on those respondents. And actually, one of the big things that comes through very clearly is that the more international the perspective of a company, the more propensity they have to innovate and the more competitive they are.
The EU's have that criteria as well.
Yeah, well, even they're lagging behind the big competitors from Southeast Asia, for example.
I mean, the European Commission, European Union.
Oh, I see. Yes.
And their criteria.
Yeah, I thought you meant as in the countries, the companies within that bloc. So I think we've still got a long way to go, and I think Brexit's not helpful, but it's not the only reason behind all of that. It's lack of investment over many years.
So you're saying that with a board which is multinational, or with the senior management which is quite multinational, has anybody charted? Are they more performant? Are they growing quicker?
Some are, some aren't. But I think it is. I don't even know whether it's because the board is international, as in the makeup of it. But when you have a more international outlook, you'll definitely have more propensity to look at new technologies, innovation, supply chain management changes, restructure, and you're going to perform better and be more competitive. So I think this is where there's a missing link.
Do you have a comment on this in terms of Unilever with your teams, etc.?
Yeah, I think basically it is, Unilever, it's a very international company, spread everywhere, and basically I think that's really the base and the culture of the company to allow people going around and being everywhere. So basically it's not necessarily seen like a country in itself. It's basically all the, it's about technology or products or innovation. They are traveling and are meant to go and reach different markets and different consumers. And this is the way how they are developed, from initial space. And even if you have a newly acquired company, you ensure that products of that respective market will reach very soon other markets. Of course, the current situation in UK put a lot of pressure in changing the structure of the business, just because, of course, had been organized to become very efficient in terms of supply chain, in terms of production, the production sites, so on and so forth. Now this will require quite a lot of changes in terms of supply chain production sites, where there will be dedicated and production, how this production will be done. Of course, will not change dramatically. We have the biggest factory for deodorants is here in Leeds, and will stay here and will continue to supply half of the world. Of course, that will have an impact on the pricing, probably, if the condition will change and there will become taxes or whatever, so on and so forth. But of course, on the other hand, this change has a huge impact and bring a huge cost for the company itself, because require a lot of changes in the product itself. So that's a huge investment we need to make just to rework completely all the products, for example. And that will have an impact on overall profitability of the company. And I think like us and many other companies in the same will require quite a lot of high costs, which may have an impact on profitability or further on in further investment towards the growth of the company. Either that's investment in communication, for example, to grow the brands, or investment towards some acquisition. Because in the end, you need to find a balance.
Something has to give.
Exactly. So it needs to come from somewhere,
But I think the point is that businesses will adapt that way. They just need to know what they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's really.
From my experience of talking to businesses, they are agile. They are in business to do business and to make money. And actually, they will adapt to whatever they need to adapt. It's not comfortable. You're right, it will affect the bottom line, but actually they just need to know what to do.
I think that's really a fundamental point, because currently it's working on different scenarios.
Yeah.
So it's like you have scenario A, B, C. I think that's your fourth scenario putting on place, and then you put all your forces and a lot of resources behind all, and because you need to be with all of them ready, exactly, kind of in 2 weeks what is going to be in place, or how much time do you have to adapt.
Yeah.
Tom.
Tom Reddy, I work at Harrier with Oliver. I'm one of the ex-civil servants in the room. So,
That's all right.
it's all right. So, Anne-Marie, on your point about, I guess, British business abroad, while I was the embassy in Jordan and Saudi Arabia, I didn't work in the trade section, but when I was there, but also in the last couple of years since I've been out of it, I have had a number of occasions, businesses being slightly underwhelmed with connectivity issues at British embassies abroad, not being able to get the right access, maybe a lack of expertise there, but then equally on some occasions it was brilliant because you had the right people, so it's sort of a bit of quite patchy. What do you think, how could that potentially be ironed out? Do you need to bring in people from business more into those trade sections? Do you need a mixture? How can you iron out those
That's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one because actually I've seen so many iterations in that respect over the years. And it's been kind of tried and tested. A lot of people actually that are working in embassies in DIT now are from the national sort of market, and they tend to have been people who have been in industry or in business. Whether that's made a massive difference, again, it's patchy. But even with chambers, it's patchy. Some are brilliant, some are not so good, because it's about people at the end of the day, and it's whether they're skilled enough or not skilled enough. And actually, we talked about skilled labour and unskilled labour, access to talent quite a bit earlier on, and I think that is a major issue that, again, we're kind of looking at Brexit as a scapegoat for. But actually, from some of the research that we did in my previous organisation, this has been an issue across Europe for a very long time. And actually those, some of the companies that we researched a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago now, were saying that they want access to talent, a global talent base, because actually they weren't getting the right skills within Europe. And that skills problem is to do with education, and it's much, much bigger problem than just Brexit. But going back to your point, I actually am a bit stumped on that one because they've tried and tested several things. I think one of the big problems is that there isn't enough longevity in some of these trials. So they will try, they had this program with giving seed funding to British chambers to deliver services rather than DIT locally or UKTI, because again, it's been called a million different things as well, UKTI locally. And that lasted 4 years, and then the funding sort of dried up, which was natural, but even that program, whether it was successful or not, is questionable. And actually what it did create was a bit of sort of competition with the local UKTI, because they saw the chambers, suddenly taking over their jobs, essentially. So some of these ideas are good in theory, but actually in practical terms, they've created quite a lot of problems. So I'm a bit stuck to know what would work. I would imagine them working more closely together, bringing the DIT teams in with the chamber team, and actually consistently business planning for the year ahead together, where resources are used from both sides to deliver, I think could be quite a good way forward. But it needs to be tried and tested. It needs to be piloted maybe in a small sort of group or region perhaps, to see whether it's got legs, and it needs slightly longer time to work out whether it works. And it can't just be changed with every new groom that comes into DIT. It's the best I can do. Yes.
My name's Astro. I run a consultancy with my own business. I'm ex-Foreign Office. We met before a long time ago. But,
Yes, I reckon.
I was in UKTI in India in 2001 to 2005.
Oh, interesting.
And I agree with your point about first-time exporters. When we were doing the business plan about what do the businesses actually want, as opposed to what do we think we can deliver.
Yeah.
And these were discussions we were having in India, and it's about that focus. Whoever it is, are you actually driving outcomes for business? And the point is that, to just echo the point a little bit about the business side, people want to know about environmental standards, they want to know about investment models, they don't want copy-paste sort of tender from a newspaper, right? They want to know who the partners are, service level representatives. If I want to build a building, how do I buy the land, how do I register?
Yeah.
That's what they want. So it's about how, when I was told I was going to India, it was called Trade Partners UK, then it was British Trade International, and then it was UKTI. I was only there for 4 years, it was called 3 different things.
And DIT now.
And now it's DIT. But the point is exactly that. Whether you're an SME or a prime, the same questions relevant to your business need to be able to be answered. And do the people who are providing that service, and it's a service, whether it's free or charged for owners or whatever, it's still a service. Are you actually answering the questions? And this is the point, as we're talking here about partnership development, due diligence, understanding, providing a list of contacts saying, meet them, we know who these people are.
Yeah.
My first question, having been on both sides of the fence, when I moved into the private sector, would be, okay, this person who may or may not be my local partner, how many companies have they successfully represented in the past? Or they're very well known in the segment. I'm not asking that question. How many other companies have they successfully represented? But then the embassy can't actually do that due diligence.
No, they can't.
They're not allowed to do that. And so you're providing a service but only half of it. And it's a really interesting point that you're making about the consistency levels. And Treasury tells DIT to keep moving the ball in terms of targets, and that's why it keeps changing every day. Meanwhile, business builds 5-10-year business plans and has target markets and resources allocated. This part of the service provision from government is constantly changing.
Yeah.
Isn't that partly to do lack of budget, changes
Yes.
of budgets? Yeah,
A big part of it.
a big part of it. So is that going to change? We
Well,
don't
all
know yet.
resources are being diverted, I suppose, to signing FTAs. We're negotiating and signing FTAs, so watch the space. I'm not sure how it's going to progress, because don't forget there's also the DIT contracts within the UK as well. This isn't just about overseas networks.
That's up for tender, isn't it?
Yes, it's up for tender now, so the world is changing. Sorry, I've just realised it's there.
Is that what, did you want to ask a question?
I can do, as I say, more sort of.
Yeah, we got time. Yeah, we got time.
So am I on now?
Time.
7 minutes.
Steve Akinlayan. It's a question for Oliver.
Yeah.
I'm interested, obviously you spoke about volatile areas of the world and where the rule of law and governance is quite the same over here. I just wondered, in your sort of day-to-day role, your assignments and where you're working, are you increasingly finding the need to adopt sort of forensics, counter-fraud skills as much as almost straightforward due diligence activities?
Well, that's part of what we do. But I mean, the main thrust of our work is on the underlying due diligence. I think if the underlying due diligence suddenly throws up things which suggest the need for sort of forensic accounting, that's sort of like phase 2 of a project and a sort of separate conversation to have with the client.
Nice and easy and quick.
Okay, any more questions? I think we're wrapping up now.